You're listening to Grown and Growing with Sonia Hamlin. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the podcast. Yes, I'm recording my intro via video. This is the first time I'm doing this, so have some grace with me. Look, so the next episode of Grown and Growing is up, and it's my first interview of 2024. And I have a wonderful guest. We had a great conversation. She's so smart. My guest is Tonya Carter, who is a relationship and marriage exit strategist. She's also an author and a podcast host. And she just dropped some major gems about, overcoming past relationships. So we all know somebody who has gone through a relationship and they have come out on the other side and they are a shell of their former selves. They maybe have developed this negative outlook of of relationships as a whole, or maybe we just notice that they just keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. This is the type of work that Tonya Carter specializes in. She does amazing work with women who are ready to let their past relationships stop dictating how they act, behave, and feel in the future. And she really, helps them overcome all of those negative feelings and emotions that come along with divorces or really bad breakups. We have a wonderful conversation coming up. You're definitely are going to feel blessed by what she says and what she has to offer. So if you have friends who are going through a breakup or who have been through a breakup a while ago, but they still seem to carry some of that baggage, you may want to forward this to them because it's a good conversation. So I'm not going to talk any further. I'm just going to get right into this conversation with Tonya. Welcome to the podcast, Tonya. I'm
Thank
so
you
glad.
so much. I'm glad that I am here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
I'm so happy to have you. I don't know if you could tell by my smile, but I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a long time. And so I'm glad the day is finally here.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
and I'm going to introduce you just say what you do and just get into the topic. Tonya Carter, relationship and marriage exit strategist, which I love. I love that title. And we're going to talk about that. But you're
Mhm.
also the author of a book, Divorce Your Story, and also the host of a podcast, Purposely Thriving.
Mhm.
So you're very busy doing all the things. So I'm just glad you took some of your time to come to Grown and Growing to talk about marriage and relationships exit strategies. I
Mhm.
love that. How
Thank
did you
you.
even come up with that title? Why did you even decide? Why does the world need an exit strategist for relationships?
Well, I really believe that relationships impact the quality of your life,
Mm,
right? They do. I mean, you can be the most educated person, PhD, all types of degrees. You can be financially successful, you can be a serial entrepreneur. None of that matters when it comes to the quality of your life in terms of saying, okay, yes, I have this, but my relationships aren't thriving like they need to be. And the truth of the matter is that our relationships are not going to last. Not because that's what we want. That's just the journey that we have to take. And that disrupts you. It disrupts your day to day. It disrupts your routine. It disrupts your children. It disrupts your finances. It disrupts how you show up at work. It disrupts how you lead as a manager or a CEO, right? They are disruptions. It's a altering life event. A divorce is a life altering event. It's a lot of grief.
mhm,
It's very equivalent to the death of losing a loved one. And that's a statistic. And so if that's the case, then we need to be more intentional about designing our next chapter, right? We don't need to just act like this wasn't a big deal. It was a big deal. And you owe yourself to admit that and do some healing work, some heart work, because that can really alter the heart on
Yeah.
how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see other people that come into your life. It can do a lot of damage, more damage than what people want to allow, even if you don't want to be with the other person anymore.
Mhm.
People think this is about the ex. It's actually not. It's about you and how you see things going forward. I've heard so many people say, I would never X, Y, and Z. I would never get another relationship. I would never ever. That comes from something,
Right.
right? And so we need to work through that. And we need a strategy. We need to really get clear on what this looks like for my finances. What does this look like for my children? What does this look like in regards to how I even see men or women?
Hmm.
It alters you. And
It
so
does.
you need a plan. You have a plan to retire, you have a plan to buy a home, you have a
Yeah.
plan for everything else. But this is an area that I think people overlook because they think about it just being a couple, but it's so many layers to that that you have to detach from. So there's a
It's
dissolving piece, but there's a detachment that you need to do as well.
Yeah, I like the that you said that you call yourself an exit strategist because
Mhm.
I think that first of all, it just shocks you, right? It shocks you into thinking about what you're about to enter, like, or what you're about to do. It makes it sound very serious, right? And also, I think I like the juxtaposition of the, the exit strategist compared to what happens at the end of a relationship because the end of a relationship can be so emotional. It can be irrational. It could be it could be take a toll on your emotions, and you're not always seeing clearly. And
Right.
so the idea of looking at it as that you need a strategy to get through it, I think
Mhm.
kind of cuts through all of the emotion that's there. So, and I think
I
you're
think
right. But
It actually, in terms of the emotion part, it's not something that gets minimized. It actually needs to be something that's addressed. However, when you are in an emotional state, you may not be thinking clearly on your decision making, right? Because even when you dissolve a marriage, there's still big decisions like the legal part of it all,
right,
right? And so you don't want to go in where your emotional state is so intense where you're not making the best intelligent decisions. So having that strategist is to help you work through your emotions as well. It's not about, oh, forget how you feel. No, we need to address how you feel
right.
because when you don't address how you feel, it just travels with you. It never goes anywhere. It shows up in something else. And so we need to allow ourselves to feel and deal. But you need someone there who's unbiased, but you also need someone who is compassionate enough to help you through that. Because if not, it can really not be a good client coach type of relationship. And so the emotional state is very crucial. That's actually the most important piece of it all.
So at what point does someone who's going through a breakup or a divorce, at what point would they work with you? Sometimes relationships, when they end, sometimes they can be cut and dry. It's over, that's it. And you know
Mm-hmm.
it's over. And then other times it can the ending kind of drags on. It's not as black and white. So at what is the best time for someone who is going through something like that to engage a person like you? Because you're not the divorce attorney who
Mm-hmm.
is the person who is handling the legal aspects of the marriage, and you're not a therapist, the person that may help them with the emotional part or the mental part of getting through it. So at what point do would someone engage you in their
Okay.
divorce?
So I actually do work with people with the mental and emotional part. I'm just not a therapist.
Yeah.
We have to tackle that because if not, we won't be able to do anything else. Now, I will say that I've worked with clients who have been out for years,
Mm, okay.
right? But it still impacts them. It impacts the story they tell themselves about who they are, what they can have, what they can do, and who they can become. I've worked with women who just got out of one. My approach is different to each lady
Mm,
because when you are just getting out, you may not know if you want to go back or not, because you're still is still fresh. So
Right.
my goal is not about whether or not if you want to go back. My goal is to help you get stabilized because you still have to function in your day to day. You have children, you have work, you have your household obligations. If you have a business, you have a business. So these things are still happening while you are dissolving a marriage,
Right.
right? So it's important that I really have to assess where people are to help decide where they need to go. If it's above what I can do, then I do recommend for them to go to therapy
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not a therapist per se. But depending on where they are, therapy may be a better approach.
Mm-hmm.
It very well may be. However, then I work with the majority of the women I work with already know that going back is not an option because everything has already been done,
Right.
right? In terms of wanting to work it out, whether or not if their spouse left them for somebody else, their spouse and is in a whole nother relationship, they're not going back to that.
Right.
So at this point, it's like, how am I going to move forward? What am I going to do to make sure that my life is intentional? How am I going to design this? Excuse me, I can't get it out. Design my next chapter. So it really just depends on where she is
Mm-hmm. And
because I do give a level of work in my program that requires a level of attention. And if you don't have the emotional capacity just yet, then we may not be able to work together in my program. Maybe some one-on-one coaching, but not in the program because it's very well thought out and everything like that. So yeah, it just depends on where they are.
so, in an interview that I listened to that you gave, you said in that interview that that divorce birthed an authentic you. Um,
Oh,
and I
yeah,
love
it
that.
can.
Yeah. Like, and how did you come to realize that you were not being authentic in your marriage, but, or maybe you were it was a different you. But can you explain what you meant by that? The divorce birth, your authentic self.
Yeah, I think when I did a lot of my work, because you have to do the work, and the work is looking within, um, getting a level of awareness, being honest with yourself for a change, like killing the noise, not trying to live up to what maybe your parents wanted of you, what society wanted of you, what religious teachings, or I would say unhealthy religious teachings tells you, really dying to a lot of that noise and really tuning in to what's in your head and in your heart. And to be honest with you, it wasn't that I didn't know. I didn't want to admit that I did know because that meant I had to take off the mask and now show up and be seen as someone who was not being quote unquote real.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to uphold an expectation that I had it together or I was this type of woman. And it can cause you to choose so wrong in a lot of your life. And then for me, it was my marriage. I realized that there was a lot of things about me that I needed to work through. I needed to understand me more. And so my divorce allowed me to see that, because now you're not hiding behind a relationship. Some people hide behind their marriages. They hide behind their work. They hide behind everything. But when you strip yourself of these things and it's just you bare and transparent, you got to now be honest with you. And that was what I realized that it birthed the authentic me. But that was because I wanted it to. I didn't care what no one thought anymore. I didn't like my life. I didn't like the direction after my divorce. I made decisions that I didn't like. I kept repeating some of the same type of men. You got to look at that. You can't keep
Right.
pointing the finger and blaming. You got to reroute that and say, you know what? I got to look within me because I'm not liking this woman I'm becoming. And so I got to a point where I didn't care what no one else thought. And that was back in
Right.
2015. I was 34 years old. I'm 43 now.
Mm-hmm.
And had I not did that, my story would still be the same at 43.
Right.
So divorce your story, which is the title of my book, it means that we gotta disrupt this narrative that doesn't align to the highest of who we can become. And that's what I did in 20. That's when I decided to do in 2015. And all over the years, I've just been doing the work.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Obviously, this podcast is targeted towards women in their 40s. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of what you said about living up to people's expectations, doing
Mm-hmm.
things because it is the right thing to do versus what you feel in your heart. I feel like in our generation specifically, that was really like drilled down to us. Like,
Oh,
go check these boxes, and when you do, your life will be perfect. Your life will be great. Like that is how you achieve the quote unquote American dream. And I think we're the last generation to kind of fall for that. I don't think the
right. Because
generation,
this generation, like, we ain't doing all that. I
they're
don't know
like,
what you talking
we
about.
don't believe
I
that.
ain't got time for that. Yep.
I think the generation we're in is the last generation to have that lesson and realize you get to this age and you realize that it's false. So a lot of it is, and when you get there, it's confusing and it is disappointing because
Oh,
you put a lot
100%.
of, yeah, you put a lot of effort and forethought, and everybody told you that this was the right way to go. And then you get here
Mm-hmm.
and it's not exactly what you thought. So when you're trying to help women overcome like their divorce, I imagine that there is a lot of like shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of disappointment, regret.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get them to, because you talked about dating or repeating bad behavior, repeating bad choices, rather picking the
Mm-hmm.
same person. How do you get them to reflect on either this past relationship or previous relationships, reflect on that, learn from it, but also not feel the guilt, the shame, the regret that kind of comes with that reflection?
I think that's a really good question. So, one of the things that's really important is for my clients to have a safe space.
Mhm.
If we don't have a safe space, the trust isn't there for them to eventually open up. Opening up takes building a relationship. That's important for me. So, I personally feel like I've had a great relationship with every client I work with.
Mhm.
I really believe that because what mattered to me was making sure that they felt like I can be honest and not be judged. That's first and foremost.
Right.
When that's established, which that's kind of established when they say I want to work with you and we work out the terms and agreements. However, the first week we can't go in with that. That's a lot, right? So I would say we go over a few things, maybe the first 3 weeks, and then we kind of get into some more deeper things. And around that time, we've had time to communicate. One of the things that's really important for my clients to do is feel. If they do feel regret, they need to feel it. I know it sounds weird. They do need to feel the guilt, not because it's true, but I need them to know that they're feeling some type of way. You know how we hear people say, "I feel some type of way."
Mhm.
What is that? Like,
What is that way?
what is that way? Like, what is some type of way? Like, let's call it something. Let's not just say I feel some type of way and we don't have a name to it. So my goal is for my clients to expand their emotional vocabulary,
Mm, that's
right?
good.
Because they need to know, if I'm being triggered, what is it? If I'm feeling guilty, why? And challenge the guilt, because that doesn't necessarily mean because you feel it, that doesn't mean that it's right, but it does mean that it's real. And when you start being in tune with yourself, you start to trust yourself. You can't trust yourself when you don't allow yourself to feel at all. So I'm huge on feeling, because a lot of my clients are Black women. A lot of my clients are high performing women,
Mhm.
right? So guess what? They've been taught to be strong their entire lives. They've been told that,
Yes.
you know what, that's the blueprint. Nothing else, girl. Just be strong, be
Right.
independent, hyper independent.
Mhm.
Right. So now I'm telling you to do the opposite. A lot of women don't know how to feel because they've been so disconnected to themselves because they're
Right.
working, they're taking care of the kids, somebody calling them girl, I need you. And you like, yeah, girl, I'm on my way. Like, you know how to do that
Yes.
for everybody else. But then when it comes to you, you kind of like, you twirling your thumb. You don't know what that
Right.
feels like. So getting women to feel is
Right.
probably the most I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it takes more work for them to do. So that's what's really important. So we have a list of words. We practice a high EQ
Yeah.
in my program because now you can feel your triggers, not just triggers you don't want to feel, but the joyful ones too. If something made you smile today, I need for you to acknowledge that. What was
Mhm.
it that brought you joy? Because all we know a lot of the times,
Yes.
I hate to say this, is pain. We
Struggle.
don't struggle, right? So when
Right.
something makes you smile, you overlook that.
Right.
No, girl, what made you smile today? Some probably made you kiki all day, and you don't want to admit that. Girl, what did you kiki about?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the point I'm saying is that I want them to feel it because I want them to know it's there.
Right.
I want them to know that it's real, it's not right, meaning that, but it could be, right? What are you guilty about? Did you do something that you wish you hadn't done?
Mhm.
Let's talk about it, right?
Right.
Because when we can talk about it, now we can have a strategy so we don't have to keep doing that. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, it completely makes sense.
Okay.
I think a lot of what you were describing is me, me, like I see a lot of this in myself. The key
Yeah.
where you have to, because you're taught to, at least I was to taught to be strong, and that sometimes
Yeah.
feelings equal failure. And I'm like, you feel like a failure if you're feeling XYZ. And so you learn to bury it. You bury it with
Mm-hmm.
work, you bury it with food, you bury it with caring for other people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definite. I feel like it is um, a great service to
Yes,
be the
ma'am.
one that has somebody focused and catered on you. And initially, like you said, it may feel uncomfortable to do that, but I
Mm-hmm.
think everybody's so much better for it when you can name. It's almost like going back to when you were a child and naming
But that's
exactly
what
what it is.
And that's exactly what it is. So a lot of us, what we do is I do have them go back to their child, their inner child, because she's still there anyway. We need to go back and talk to her. We need to tell her what we wish she would have had to let her know it's okay. That's probably one of the most emotional exercises that I have in my program.
I imagine. Yeah.
But you know what, though? It changes so much about you. And not only that, it changes how you function in your life. It changes your relationship with your children. Because guess what? When you know that this mattered to you, you like, I gotta teach my kids this. You
Hmm.
show up better for them. You show up better in future relationships. You have the uncomfortable conversations. A lot of women neglect their needs in their relationships. They overly perform, they overly function,
Hmm.
right? At the expense of their needs. They
Right.
don't communicate. And so this is not just this helps you in so many different areas. And I think is life changing. It changes you completely. It helps you know how to co-parent. It helps you know how to navigate a high conflicting ex because you start to realize that how they function has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And when you realize that, wow, this is really what he's going through or what she's going through, this comes from their own childhood that
Mhm.
they have to unpack. You don't take it as personal anymore. If anything, you
Yeah.
might have more empathy for them because you realize how hurt they are.
And it's important work because
Oh, yeah.
you are going to, in some cases, especially if you have a child with this person, you're going to be entangled with that person for the rest of your life, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
always going to be around. Or even if you don't have a child with that person, if your finances are linked in ways that are not easily untangled, you're always going to have to
Mm-hmm.
see that person. And so, do you want to feel triggered every time you see, every time you have to interact with that person or he has to be in your space because you share kids? So it's definitely worth it to take the time to work on yourself so that you're not re-triggered every time you see this person.
Yeah.
So my next question is, so what are, when women decide to engage you to help coach you through this time, you said that you work with women who are recently divorced or they may have been divorced many years ago. What stage are they in? Like, how do they determine that they need help? Like, what are some signs? I want to talk to women out there who may not know, like they may suspect they need some help, but how do they come to you and what are they feeling at the time? Like, how do they decide, yes, I need to work with Tonya on this?
I think what could help most women is to really look at their every year,
Mm.
right? And here's what I mean, like really take a step back and really just look at your every year. So let me kind of paint this picture. So in 2015, what helped me was when my father had a heart attack, right? Um, he had a heart attack like the next day after he was at my house. And that caused me to almost say put everything kind of stop. You know how things just stop
Mm-hmm.
when something tragic happens like that? And
Right.
what it allowed me to do was think about my life.
Right.
It's crazy because when I went to go see my father, and he's still here, he's alive and well.
Yes.
But
Thank
when I
God.
came home, I know because it really scared me. I'm really close to my dad, and the thought of losing him was very scary.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I came home and I laid across my bed and I was just thinking about life because it was like, okay, my father was here at my house the day before, and then the next day we're in the hospital. That's just how quick life happens. And it made me think about my life in ways that I never did before. And it allowed me to just be honest for a second, like totally radical honesty. And I didn't like the woman I was becoming. I was divorced at this time, 5 years after.
Mm, wow.
And I saw that the story of the experience is what impacted me. To be honest, we didn't need to stay married. It wasn't the marriage that I wanted to go back to. It was how the experience left me. And that's what's more important. How does the experience leave you? Because a lot of times when you talk about divorces and healing, many sometimes they get the misunderstanding that you're saying you want to go back to your ex. And that may not be the case. I did not want my marriage at that point. At that point, I felt like everything we could do was done.
Mm-hmm.
And I was okay with that part. But the residue of the experience is what impacted me. It impacted my mentality, thinking, okay, I'm a single mom. And the reason why I say I'm a single mom is because he moved out of state.
Mm, okay.
So I carried the parental load, and it did leave a lot of resentment in that area. When we initially separated, he moved on really quickly. I ain't gonna lie, I wasn't feeling that. Um, I felt like a failure because I did not keep my family together.
Right.
And it can actually unconsciously carry with you. My
Oh.
choices in men were very similar. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mm-hmm.
I felt like because I went through a divorce, I put a ceiling on what I can do in my life.
Yeah.
And so when I looked at my life from the time I got a divorce from 2010 to now 2015, when I'm laying across my bed, I realized that my year was very similar of the previous years. The
Mm-hmm.
only thing that had changed was my age and the years. My life was still the same.
Right.
And so sometimes you got to just step outside of everything and just really ask yourself, what fruit is being produced? Now, on social media, it didn't look like that. That's why I tell people don't let social media be
Right.
your blueprint to determine, because I posted my highlight reels.
Mm-hmm.
I was good at I masked a lot of things. Like I tell people, I mastered the art of masking.
Mm-hmm.
So don't even let social media fool you. What I realized was that the heart is what changed.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
I needed to do the heart work.
Yeah.
And so, when people listen to my podcast, I speak to the heart.
Right.
I hardly talk about your ex,
Mm-hmm.
not in that manner. I talk about it in a way for you to really think how this person really left you. How did this event leave you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's more about taking inventory of your life.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that, I mean, I'm not divorced, but I mean, I have friends who have gone through
Mhm.
divorces, and to watch them and try to support them through that, it's very difficult because you're right. It doesn't just there's a feeling of, yes, this is ended, but I can see how it impacts other aspects of your life, other
Yeah,
choices you
a
make at
hundred
work,
percent.
the choices you make about
Absolutely.
your kids. Yeah, it does permeate into other areas of your life, and you're living a diminished version of yourself. Like it's not even,
Absolutely.
yeah. And some people
Like
do
think
that for
about,
years. Yeah, like you said.
and I want people to think about people they know that
Right.
talk about the same thing all the time. You'd be like, man, they still talking about this person. And it's not because they're doing it from a thriving place, they're doing it from a hurt place.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you, certain managers, I could tell, even at the job that I am now, I've noticed, and they're no longer there, but I've noticed women who have been divorced and how they show up in leadership. Even men, it ain't just women. I just work with women. So it
Right.
doesn't matter what the gender is. But what I'm saying is that you could tell how people, how hurt or healed people are based on how they lead.
Mm-hmm.
And they call it their personality.
Right.
No, that's not your personality. You've just been that way for so long. You now have said that it's your personality, but that's not your personality.
Right.
But we like to call it, well, that's just how I am. No, it's not, sweetheart. And it's not that I'm being funny. It's just that I know because I've been there.
Yeah.
Think about how people talk about men, how they discuss women. Those people are hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I get it. I get why you're hurt, but let's work through that. Let's not stay in it. You get some women together or some men together and how they just really dog out the other gender. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
I thought you was over it. You're not. Look how
Mm-hmm.
it left you to be. I ain't dating nobody no more. I ain't gonna treat nobody good like I did the other person. Listen, I get it. And you know what? It's so interesting because I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine, and I said, I never want to be shortchanged based on what somebody else did to you.
Right.
I don't. I don't
Right.
want the short end of the stick. And so what I realize is that I don't want to give somebody else the short end of the stick. If anything, you should get a better version of me.
Correct.
You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I've learned that sometimes when you do this work, it's so interesting because my clients, when they do this work, they be like, Coach Tonya, I see it now. I see
Mm-hmm.
things that I never saw before. I see how my mom was hurt. I see you see differently.
Right.
Your lens change. So much happens when you do this work, man. It's you'll never be the same.
So let's talk about your program. So how do you work with women? You mentioned one-on-one coaching.
Mhm.
Do you also, so explain to me how somebody would work with you? What do you have? What do you have?
Okay. Well, it's so crazy. I'm actually having my workshop. It's called Beyond the Breakup.
Mm-hmm.
It is a 5-day workshop that's free. I'm having that
Oh,
February the 26th through March the 1st. So if those who are listening, I don't know when this is going to be aired, but if you go to beyondbreakupworkshop.com, you can sign up and be a part of my workshop. And that's totally free that I'm giving. Now I do have a 12-week program
mm-hmm.
that I have. And I love this program. It's actually one of my favorite programs. It's called Thrive.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 12-week program, but it is an accelerated program. I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of work in here. I didn't realize it was accelerated until my clients told me, Coach Tanya, you have a lot of work in here. It is work. It's not one of those programs that you come, you show up, you wave, and you go. No, we're doing deep work. It is a small, more intimate um space because we talk about some things and I need my clients to feel safe. That's more important than anything. So I have my 12-week program that I do that. And so that will be starting in March.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing the workshop. I'll be offering my program then. And so we'll be working for 12 weeks. And I also have a one-on-one. I only take a few clients in my one-on-one though
Mm-hmm.
because there's a little bit more that we do because it is one-on-one. So the price is different, but most importantly, the access to me is different as well. So I work with clients one-on-one. And then I have my book, Divorce Your Story, A Woman's Guide to Heal and Thrive After Divorce. And then I have my podcast, right? So for those who like, I don't know if I'm financially ready, hey, you have the podcast. I drop episodes weekly. I have about 159 episodes for you.
Yes. I love it because you have all the bases covered, ladies. There and men, there are no excuses because you have the free breakup course, that's a week, right? Then you have
Beyond the breakup. Yeah, it's a
beyond the
5-day
breakup.
workshop.
Then you have something, a group coaching for 12 weeks. You say that's accelerated. I feel like 12 weeks is a substantial amount of time. Like, I feel like that's a lot of time, and
It
a good
is.
amount of time.
It
So,
is. I'm working on creating a membership too, but that's going to be only for those who I work with in my 12-week and in my one-on-ones. So
mhm,
that will be, it's only for only inclusive to those individuals. I may create something else later,
mhm,
but I want to keep things a little simplistic. But for now, that's what I have. And 12 weeks is a good amount of time, but the work continues. Like, I don't think you
yeah,
ever get off the journey. You become obsessed with improvement. After that, you're like, okay, what's
yeah,
next? How can I keep this thing going? And that's why I want to create the membership, because I
yeah.
want to make sure my clients continue to grow and evolve.
And also, you want to keep it going because it feels good. Like, it
Mhm.
feels good to be in a space where you're healed and you see more for yourself. So, I want that for every woman, whether they are dealing with a breakup or whatever caused them to be, in a space where they feel diminished. I want that for every woman. So, how do you know when you have successfully moved on? What are some telltale signs that you know what, you have done the work and you really feel healed in this way? How do you know?
Oh man, I have been asked that question so much. And I'm gonna be honest with you, that's a hard question to answer. And the
Mhm,
reason being is because there's no, how can I say this? Oh my goodness. Here's how I want to put this. No one is 100% whole.
mhm,
And I think sometimes when we talk about healing and we're talking about being whole, I think people feel like I got to be perfect in order to feel like I've moved on. Right. And that's just not accurate. If you allow that to be your measurement, you'll never see the growth that you're making along the way.
mhm,
So, one of the things that I do with my clients is that I let them write down their wins on a daily basis. Because when you see your small wins, you're able to see you start to see that you're moving forward. So let's just say, for instance, you have a conflict, a high conflict ex.
mhm.
And normally they're texting you, they're nudging at you because they know doing that will trigger you. When you don't respond, you winning.
Right,
Because the old you, oh, I know, you know what I'm saying? You gonna
right,
give them the business, right?
right.
And so you like, you know what? I know I even if you take something long and delete it and you didn't send it, that's moving forward,
Yeah.
right? When you're not as triggered as you used to be,
Mhm.
you see that you're moving forward, right? So it's in the doing and acknowledging all the doings that's going to allow you to say, you know what, I am moving forward. I
Yeah.
wasn't like I was even a month ago. I
Right.
wasn't even the same person like I was last week. So I want people to not get into this thing of I got to be 100% whole, because
Mhm.
baby, that ain't going to happen, because you don't give yourself permission to be a human being.
Yeah.
Human beings, we are, I'm a believer. So I believe that I was created in God's image. That means that I'm perfectly made in his image. However, I have flaws, I have faults. And if I knew how to do everything, I wouldn't need him to depend on. And
Right.
so I'm saying all of that because I want people to realize that don't look for perfection here. Look for progress.
Mm.
You understand what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
look for that. So even if you are dating somebody, right? And you're still working through some things, depending on where you are with it, right? But you're communicating better. You're letting someone know how you feel, right? You're talking about, maybe an issue that you saw that you saw this person did. It may have triggered you, but instead of you reacting, you're like, you know what? Why was I triggered by this? Because that trigger could be something that someone else did that you are putting on them,
Mhm.
right? You're more aware of you now. That's progress.
Yes.
So I don't want people to
Yeah.
get into this 100% of something. I'm not 100% of nothing.
Right. I love, first of all, Tonya, brilliant. That's a brilliant way to answer the question. I love it. I was like, I love the way you answered that question because you're right. I'm like, it is not you reach a goal and that's it. And then you can celebrate because I mean, because all you're doing really, when you
Yeah.
think about it, is checking boxes again, right?
Yeah, this ain't a check in the box. This is a journey.
Yeah,
And so I just encourage people, this isn't about being perfect. This isn't about having it all together.
yeah.
Because I had someone ask me that and I did a podcast on it and I was actually just looking for it. It was episode 104. How
Mhm.
do I know if I'm healed from the experience?
Right.
And some of those things is you're not as easily bothered. When you start getting some of that unbothered energy, like, you know what, girl, child, please, you know what, that right there, you know, you don't see it as a loss anymore. You see it as lessons. Like I tell people, you got to extract the lessons from this. I learned a
Mhm.
lot in my marriage. I did. And I don't look at it as a loss anymore. When you start creating healthier boundaries, these are the things, knowing that, you know what, this ain't something I value. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
That's letting you know you're doing the work. And most importantly, when you start giving yourself real grace, I should have said that too.
Yeah.
When you've extended grace over yourself, some of us are really unforgiving over ourselves. I know we're taught a lot about forgiving other people, but
Right.
I don't think it's enough conversation around forgiving yourself.
Yeah. And I think, and
Mm-hmm.
I love the way you answer that question too, because it doesn't paint someone with a single brush. Like everybody's different. And so my healing journey is going to look different from the next person's, from the next
Mm-hmm.
person. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely appreciate the way you answered that question. And so is there a type of mindset of somebody who is going to be successful in your program? Because I imagine that because it's relationships are so difficult, right? There's a lot to them, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Um,
Yeah.
I think there takes a certain mindset that you have to have in order to be able to even start the journey.
Yeah.
So what is the right mindset to have when you're coming to work with Tonya? I feel like you're like a tough love. I'm getting that energy. Like you're not gonna let somebody, you know, I feel like you're gonna be honest, but tough and fair, but honest. God.
Yeah. My goal is to be truthful but compassionate. That's more important because, depending on what people experience, they might be a little fragile, right? And that's okay, right? Because depending on the dynamics, the last thing they need is for me to bark,
Right,
right?
right,
I don't really, that's not necessarily my approach with them. Now, when people hear, a lot of the times by the time somebody work with me, they've either attended one of my workshops or have listened to my podcast. So they get an idea on how I function, which is good.
right.
I will say in terms of mindset, that's crucial. What I care about the most is your willingness to elevate it.
Hmm.
When you, as hard as this is, you got to take responsibility,
Right.
not for what they've done to you, but over your life. Because my program doesn't focus a lot on your ex. Because here's the thing, your ex is not here for the help, you are.
Hmm.
So we can't sit here and talk about them all the time. Now, there are parts of the program, yes, that we have to because we need information, we need evidence,
Right,
but we don't need to bash them because that's not going to help you.
right.
That's I'm not that type of coach because I don't think is as beneficial. I think there's a time for it, but to live and stay in it, I don't think that's something that's going to benefit you long term.
Hmm.
So it's more about you choosing to want to elevate your mind and being challenged to the things that you already cultivated in your head and in your heart. Because a lot of things I am going to challenge you. I have to because you said that you want to thrive. So let me be clear. The program is called Thrive for a reason.
Right.
My the goal is to not live in survival mode.
Hmm.
Most likely you've mastered that. And you don't even know that you're in survival mode because that's been your normalcy.
Right.
right? So I'm here to help you disrupt that normal. So we got to challenge the thoughts that we're having. We got to challenge the story. We got to challenge what we're feeling. We got to challenge the decisions we're making,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's going to cause you to get just a tad bit uncomfortable.
Right.
But that is where you're going to grow and that is where you're going to develop.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that I realized is that a lot of us repeat exactly the same thing,
Right. Yeah.
right? And sometimes we don't even realize, like, wow, I'm saying the same thing about a different person. And that was my story. It was the same conversations. And guess what? When you are around people who want to co-sign on that, then you really think what you're saying is facts.
Right.
So when you're in an environment with a coach like me, I'm going against what everybody else has probably told you. So I could be looked at as, well, she's no, I'm your biggest cheerleader
Yeah.
because I don't want to keep seeing you where you are. And sometimes we talk to the wrong people who can't help us. Unfortunately, your friends may not be the one, your parents, family, social media. This is why you got to be with somebody who is unbiased, but most importantly, compassionate and truthful so they can help you exit out,
Mm-hmm.
right, of all
Yeah.
of this stuff. So yes, the mindset is everything. I've had most of my clients, I would say 98% of my clients I kept to like 2% I've had to let go.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Because,
not because they just weren't in a space just yet. It wasn't because I didn't like them. I think that what they needed was beyond what I could give them.
right.
And one of the things that I do, and the reason why it's a safe space is because I pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
I'm monitoring you every week. I'm observing you. I'm seeing things because that's my job. That's what you hired me for.
Right.
People pay for all these coaches. And it's like, well, if you're going to pay somebody who really wants to help you. And
Right.
I want to help my client. So I'm observing. And if I see that maybe the state in which you are in is more intense than what I can handle, then I am going to refer you to a therapist because that's important. It's not like, oh, I'm kicking you to the curb.
Right.
I'm just rerouting your help
Mm-hmm.
because it wouldn't make sense for me to keep your money and I can't fully help you. That bothers me.
Yeah. And I think that I appreciate that about you because I think you recognize exactly, what your limits are with that person, and that there are other avenues where people can get help. So, I mean, I think I know you're here for relationships and to help people overcome their relationships, but I feel like you could just be doing this for women in general. It doesn't have to be tied to relationships because a lot of, what you are talking about, and maybe it stemmed from a relationship, but I feel like, we as a whole, married or not, right? You may want to stay married and you may love your spouse a lot, but you may still have these same feelings that you're describing, but you don't necessarily want to get a divorce. You just want to
Oh,
change for
100%.
yourself. Yeah.
I've had clients who were separated, went back. I've had a few clients who went back to their marriages because the program is for you to look at yourself. Listen, sometimes it just may be what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's hard to admit because you don't want to accept the fact that there's some things about you that you have to unpack. I actually had one client and I worked with her back in 2021. And after we worked together, I told her, I said, I don't think you should get a divorce because she wasn't divorced yet.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I really don't think that's a good idea. Um, I said, based on what you shared, he seems to be a really amazing guy. I was like, why would you? And this was just me, my spirit led me to tell her that.
Right.
I was like, I wouldn't necessarily throw in the towel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're still together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just
Yeah.
how I felt. It wasn't just me saying it because it wasn't danger. I think it was just some things she needed to unpack. Maybe they just kind of went through a rough patch, but in doing the work, it allowed her to see a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I told her, I said, I don't think I said, just based on what you said, I said, he seems like a guy who wants to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a great guy from how you talk about
Right.
him. Why
Right.
would you, so those were the things, I've had clients who did go back. And that's their right if that's what they want to do. My goal isn't to tell you what to do. That's
Right.
your job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's not
Absolutely.
my job. Now, if you're in something unsafe,
Correct.
then
Yeah.
it's my right to tell you that you need to, remove yourself from that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Are
Mhm.
there mistakes that you find that people make? So you mentioned the woman who came to you and ultimately didn't get a divorce. Do you see mistakes that women make when it comes to ending relationships? Have you seen patterns? Maybe not mistakes, but patterns in all of women that you work with that you're just like, this is where I see, people may have blind spots or they may not
Mhm.
realize, what they're doing.
Yeah, I see quite a few. Some of them, I see the inability to communicate their needs.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of rescuing, feeling the
What?
need to, you know, overly functioning, feeling like they have this unhealthy need to be needed, meaning that they take on this person more as their project, not their partner. You
Wow.
understand?
Yes.
Um, I see that quite a bit. I really see that quite a bit. Um, Sometimes I've seen where they knew not to get married in the first place to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Even in other words, there were signs. So let
Yeah.
me be clear. Not that let me kind of go back. Let me retract that. Not necessarily they didn't want to marry that person, but they saw things in that person that they didn't address that may thought would have gotten better when they got married. So you
Mm-hmm.
saw the signs, but you didn't say anything about it. You didn't talk about it. You didn't mention it. And so it just magnified in the relationship. It wasn't that you didn't see it.
Yeah.
You saw it. It was clearly there. Just their inability to connect to their discernment.
Mm-hmm.
That's a powerful thing. And sometimes we don't want to connect to it because we don't want to accept what that discernment is really telling us.
Yeah.
You know, so I will also say maybe the approach in which things are communicated.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes we can have an underlying way of controlling things, but we may not necessarily think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it where some women are too passive.
Right.
They don't say anything. So I see some of those patterns, but I would say probably the number one I see is the inability to communicate their needs and rescuing and enabling.
Yeah. Yeah. Rescuing. That's it. Ooh, that's a big one. That's a big
Yeah,
one because I think, uh, yeah. So I think women, or I'm not even gonna say women, but sometimes people have you marry the
mhm.
potential of what and you see the potential, and sometimes the person may not even see the potential in themselves, and you're trying to force them to become something that you see
Correct,
with
which is
them.
control, right?
Yeah.
And I know that's what we want to call it. But you're telling yourself that I can make them be something that they never signed up for. That is underlying control.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then what ends up happening is that resentment builds because they're not coming out because in the way that you thought you could mold them.
Hmm.
So you're setting them up for failure and you're only disappointing yourself. And that was my issue. I did it a lot and I had to admit that that was my problem, but most importantly, I had to kind of dissect on why.
Hmm.
And these are the things that you have to do because if not, you're going to most likely repeat a lot of that moving forward, or you might end up being with somebody that you don't have to fix and you run away because some of us are so addicted to fixing that we don't know anything else outside of dysfunction. So if
Right.
somebody comes and they're already made, not perfect, but just got things in order, that actually may cause you to turn away because they don't necessarily need you in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
Because what keeps you with somebody is the need to be needed. And when they don't need you in that manner, you may find yourself saying, you know what, this don't feel right. Right. It doesn't, because you're used to fixing people.
Right.
You got
Mm.
to unlearn that. So this is why I always tell people, if you really got what you say you wanted, like if you met the man that you say you wanted, or the woman, because it's not just women, men can deal with women who, like, let's just say when men say she crazy, right?
Right.
That just means she could be a little combative, maybe, you know, but
Right.
could you be with a woman who's opposite from that?
Mm-hmm.
You got to be honest. If you've never had a woman who was more calm, not that she was a run over, a pushover, but just her approach was different. Could you handle that? Or would you
Right.
run away because she's not maybe yelling or cursing or screaming or trying to
Right.
be crazy and pop up over your house and all those things? And so we got to unlearn our attachments. We got to know what our attachment style is, and we got to see where that comes from. So yes, there's some work you have to do.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like if they work with you, you gonna get them together. Now, I feel like
Yeah,
the work that you do is really deep, is really thoughtful, um, and it is compassionate. I can see that. It comes across on the screen. And I can
yeah,
tell that you really care about what you do and the people that you do it with. So,
I
I
do.
definitely appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate it, girl.
Yes.
Honey, I love talking about this. This is right up my alley.
Yeah, you do amazing work. You do amazing work. I
I
know it. I could
appreciate it.
just tell. And the amount of work and thought that you put into your programs, it comes across. It comes across just in this few minutes that we've been, on this podcast talking. So,
Yeah.
um, where can people find you? Where can people on social media? Where can we find you, Tonya?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram. My
Mhm.
name is I am Tonya Carter. Facebook, Tonya Carter. YouTube, Tonya Carter. Website, TonyaCarter.com. So all things Tonya Carter, right?
You
Just to
got
keep it
Tonya Carter
simple.
on lock
Yeah, I'm
everywhere.
telling you, everywhere Tonya Carter, just Tonya Carter. Yep, I
And
need
you
for
have
y'all to know this.
yes, amazing podcast that you
Mhm.
do on a weekly basis. And I also want you to run through the programs that you have coming up beyond the breakup and then the others so that we can leave on that note.
Oh, absolutely. So I do have a podcast, Purposely Thriving Podcast. So it pretty much is just, that's why I give you tips, insights, strategies, some things that can really help you in your next chapter after divorce or a breakup. And then my Beyond the Breakup workshop, which will be starting on February the 26th. I can't believe today's the 15th. What we
No,
doing?
it's yeah.
I mean, like what's happening here? And so I'm having that, and you can go to beyondbreakupworkshop.com and you can sign up, and you will be able to register and show up, right? And I will have my program starting on, I think it's going to be, oh goodness, I think it's going to be March the 12th is when my program starts, but I'm going to start taking applications on February the 28th. So it is application based.
Nice.
Yeah, so that, yeah, it helps
Yeah,
get the people who, yeah, get the
who are
people who are
serious
ready to
and
do the,
ready.
yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it was great having you on the podcast, Tonya.
Thank
I feel
you.
like you help so many women, and I know so many women will be helped by this conversation that we had
Absolutely.
today. So thank you much. Thank you so much for sharing today. And for everybody else, I will see you next time.
All right.